Number 12 is a great example of how the strategy that I use for most of the writing section, predict the question, can save you some points. So as you practice, you're going to get more and more familiar with the kinds of questions that the SAT asks. And so this strategy is hard to use at first, but over time you really want to pay attention to the patterns that unify different questions, because if you can predict what they're asking about just by kind of looking at the choices, then you can point your brain in the right direction before you even really get into the nitty-gritty of the question. So in this particular case, I see that these answer choices have different punctuation. Yes, some of the other choices have different words as well, and that changes things a little bit, but the punctuation tells me that if I need to think about a comma versus a semicolon, what I really need to think about is the sentence structure, things like run-ons and fragments and what makes something a sentence. That stuff can be hard to hear sometimes, so getting my brain on that path can make me more likely to hear it as I read. So what I'm looking for really is like, what is this sentence? What is the core thing that they're saying, and how do all the other clauses relate to that? So let's look at what's written as is. While fare-free policies do increase ridership, but they have not been found to be an effective way to address traffic problems. Well, this phrase, while, is one of those phrases that we use to start kind of like an introductory or extra clause. So that tells me I've got something extra here. And it goes all the way to that comma. The real core of the sentence is, they have not been found to be an effective way to address traffic problems. That's my sentence. So what I want to do is, if I'm going to add this extra piece to it, I want to make sure I'm doing it in a way that doesn't create a fragment or doesn't create a run-on or doesn't create some weird situation. And right away, that but is causing a problem. I'm not going to connect a kind of random extra clause that's a fragment, not a real sentence. And that's what's going on here. I'm not going to connect that to another sentence using a conjunction, right? A word like but is used to connect two complete sentences when we have that comma there like that. And the first part isn't a complete sentence. So I can't use a but to do that. And the same thing kind of happens with be, right? First of all, there's two whiles, which would not be great. That's kind of weird and bad writing. But the and is doing the same thing that the but is doing. It's joining a non-sentence with a sentence, and that's not what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to join two complete sentences. And so now that leaves us with the comma versus the semicolon, and if you're not familiar with semicolons, you might have some trouble, and most people kind of just treat them both like pauses, and yes, you do pause here. Most people are just going to pick the comma because it's safer, right? We know how to use commas most of the time, but in our own writing, we don't use semicolons very often. But it would be great to back that up with a rule. And the rule for semicolons is that if we have a semicolon, we need to have a complete sentence before the semicolon and a complete sentence after the semicolon. Basically, a semicolon is a period on the SAT. So like we said, the first part is not a full sentence. It's a fragment. It's extra. So we could not use a semicolon because it violates that rule. Even though the second part is a sentence, it's that first part. It needs to be both. And that leaves us with a comma, which is an acceptable way to join an extra clause to a complete sentence. So hopefully you saw that just kind of instinctively. But when it comes to grammar on the SAT, instinct can get us in trouble. So whenever possible, I'd like to back up my instinct with actual rules. And here, sentence structure, predicting the question, gets us on the right path of rules to follow. And that gets us an answer that we're 100% confident in.